Join the team.
Hey, this is the McGuire Review, and today we're going to be taking a look at a brand new one that hasn't hit the market yet. This is going to be on Kickstarter, and it's called Space Editor. And it's from Tactical Games, 2 to 4 players, 14 plus, and 30 to 50 minutes on this one. Now, this is a fun little, I don't want to say a tile placement game because these are actually cards. They're little square cards, which is the first thing I actually like about this game. I do like the fact that they do utilize this little square card here. And we'll talk about, there are a few different types of cards that are in the game. We'll talk about those. I also really like the theme on this one. Now, I am kind of a sucker for the space-based themed, but I think they did a nice job with this, and the artwork is absolutely fantastic. There's a few different types of cards. We've got star cards, we've got planet cards, and we have ability cards. You'll be able to see those cards right here, and what we'll do is we'll go over these cards, we'll talk about why there's 4 different decks, and we'll talk about these 2 special decks here, which I think was a nice addition to this particular game. So Barrett, go ahead and load the video, and you can take a look at the video here as it's kind of giving us an overview of some of the artwork on some of these cards. Now, if we look at our 4 decks in front of us, we do have the various different elements, and this one has some really cool lore behind it, where the 4 elements are coming together. I don't want to spoil everything, but they're coming together and forming the universe, and each player is going to take control of one of these 4 elements, that being earth, wind, water, and fire. And basically what you're trying to do at the end of the game is get all the cards out of your hand, so the game will end once no one can draw any more cards from their draw pile, and then you're going to add up the victory points that is going to acquire over the course of gameplay. So you're going to be laying these cards down and positioning them in various orders connected to other cards that are already on the board, whether they're your cards or your opponent's cards, and that's going to cause various things to happen. It's going to cause cards to flip over. You might have certain abilities that will allow a card to be moved. Various things are going to take place, and then at the end you're going to count up all those victory points based on how the cards lay to determine who the winner is going to be. This a rainbow type card that you see here in the center, which is just reflecting each one of the 4 forces or elements in the universe, that's going to be the card that's going to start the game off. And one of the mechanics that I really like about this game when you start is that this card can be put anywhere on the table that first player chooses, and there is an importance to that. So this isn't a game where, let's say, oh, I just set this card here and that starts the game, and now we're going to start playing, and we're going to start putting cards next to this, and we're going to start laying cards down, and other people are going to have other cards laying down. And again, there is rule sets that say how these cards can be properly laid together. There's little symbols here we'll go over here in a minute that are on each one of these cards, on each one of the sides. Well, let's say we keep going and we get to the point where it's like, oh, we can't put another card or it would fall off the edge of the table. You wouldn't then grab everything and sort of slide it down and say, oh, we'll make it fit. That's actually part of the game. Where you actually place this card from the very beginning makes up the game board, and it is positional. So that kind of reflects to the point of like where in the vast space did the universe sort of begin. So you're going to take this card and you're going to put it, and you may choose to put it right here, right at almost kind of the edge of the table. Well, what that's going to mean is it's only going to be able to be built so far this way, and then you're going to have to come out and down, which does actually affect the build out of the actual game board, I like to call it, as you start to play and build that out, which is actually a pretty fun mechanic. I don't know that I've actually seen that in one of these tile laying games before. That particular rule that says if it was to be laid and go off the table, you wouldn't just move everything down and make sure that there's room for it to be positioned or placed on the board. Where this game specifically actually implements that mechanic, and I actually really like that. So that was one of the things I was excited about when I read through the rule set and started to play this game. Now, I'll also say, obviously, this is a prototype edition. Again, it hasn't been released at retail yet, so you are going to see some differences in the card quality. There's going to be differences in the card counts. There might even be some different types of cards, so all of those things will happen through the Kickstarter and as it gets closer to retail. So that's one thing I do want to call out as we're kind of taking a look at everything here, that this is not production quality, although the game looks pretty good. I mean, everything about it feels good. The artwork is fantastic. The box is actually really nicely done as it is right now. Now let's get to look at these two decks here, because you may be thinking, well, what are these two larger decks over here to the side? And what you're going to find are more cards for each one of those elements. So one thing that's nice about this game is you do start with a standard deck of element cards. And let's say I was the player that chose fire, and I have fire here. I can stick with those standard cards and I can play the game. But then the more you get familiar with this game, you can think of it almost as a customizable game. And that's where these decks come in. So I would come here and I would look at the cards that are for fire, which here at the bottom. And I could go here and I could start to select the ones that I want to add into my deck. So what it will allow you to do is, when you become more familiar, you can start to customize your decks. And that's when the fun really gets in, is when you're able to customize your decks and make them more strategic in how you would like to play as a player. That really, in my opinion, gets into play when you get into the two-player game, because when you play this game, there's actually a couple different ways you can set it up. You can go with what they call the half game, which is 2 to 4 players, or you can go with what they call the full game, which is 2 players. Now, the 2-player head-to-head is pretty good when you start to get into customizing your element decks. It gets into a lot of fun because there's certain strategies you can deploy that might be a little different than you would do with a standard deck. Now, when you play the 2 to 4 player game, same deal. You can customize your decks if all your players are very versed in the game and you've played quite a few times. Otherwise, I would recommend starting out with the standard deck that they do offer and not doing the customized deck if you're playing with new players, or if it is a 2 to 4 game and not everybody has been playing for a long time. It's going to make for a much easier entry game and a much smoother gameplay, because there isn't going to be certain tactics or strategies that a player is just going to be going for because they know the game really well. So I definitely recommend sticking with the standard setup if you do have new players to the game, and it'll be much more enjoyable that people get to experience the game, because it is not a difficult game at all. Now let's talk about the mechanics of how gameplay works. So when you begin the game, each player, let's say it was a 4-player game, is going to get one of these elements, and you're going to shuffle that deck up so you don't really know which cards you're going to be getting, and everybody's going to put those cards face down in front of them. And then what you're going to do is you're going to draw 2 cards, which you are going to be able to see as a player, and you're going to keep those hidden from other players. When it's your turn, you're going to get to lay one of those cards. Now, this is another main game mechanic that I really like, outside of the placement of this initial tile. In lots of tile laying games, you can put a tile down, and they generally work with the same type of approach, where there are, sides that can only hook to other sides. There's various symbols that will align with other cards. Maybe if you match up certain types of elements, you get extra points, things of that nature. But one thing that I really like about this is every time it's your turn, you're going to have those 2 cards in your hand, and you're going to have to make a very important tactical decision. You can only use one of those cards, and the other one, you don't get to retain it in your hand. You don't put it into a discard pile where once this draw deck runs out, you get to shuffle that and use it again. Oh no, it is removed from the game. And that's important because it forces you to make a very important tactical decision when it's your turn, depending on the cards that are in your hand. And sometimes that decision may be very easy. Sometimes it may be, you know what, this is not really a great card, and I don't see over the course of the next few turns how this card's ever going to benefit me, so I'll just obviously discard that card and then lay this one down. You may, and very well most of the time, get 2 really good cards. Maybe you got an ability card, and maybe you got a star or a planet card, because again, there's 3 different types of cards: ability cards, planet cards, and star cards. And they may both be great cards, and they may both actually be good for that particular turn. But you're going to have to get rid of one of them, and again, that card is discarded from the game and will no longer be used for that game, so it's gone. You only have that card that you played. And then upon your next turn, you're going to draw 2 more cards. So you're going to do that again. You're going to say, okay, I can only use one of it. Well, on this one, I'm going to use this planet card. This one, boom, discarded. It's out of the game. And I like that, because even sometimes when you have to make a decision, and let's say that, tactically play, this particular ability card here that says when a player turns this card face down, he or she will rotate 2 cards in any direction. So it may make sense for me to go ahead and play that card right there. But I might have this other card in my hand, which is this happens to be a planet card here. And it has these little symbols here on the side with some larger numbers in them. And those come into play when you place those on cards. Basically what happens is there are some symbols that overtake other symbols. This is one that generally does take over most of the symbols, and it has a larger number, which means if it is a symbol that takes over a symbol and it has a larger number, you can think of it as sort of beats that card, and in some instances will cause that card to flip over upside down, which will obviously take points away if that's one of the cards that belongs to one of your opponents. So, it may make more sense tactically to maybe throw this card down, but you may say, you know what, a couple turns from now, it might be more strategic for me to play this one. So you get rid of the card that might be a really good card that's tactically good to play on that turn, and you put down one that's going to give you maybe more of a strategic advantage a couple turns down the road, or maybe just one round later. So again, you can kind of see, based on that mechanic, how that plays out as other people are starting to play cards and lay those down, where you are having the option of being able to overtake their cards later on in the game. And I love that mechanic of this game, where you have to be forced to get rid of one of those cards, and it's completely out of the game. So it's an interesting mechanic, because you get the feel of a deck builder by customizing your elements at the beginning of the game, but it's not really a deck builder because you're not really building a deck over time. You're just using what's available to you in that pre-built deck, and then literally removing cards from the game, which might have been great cards that you put in from the beginning to be used, but they might not make sense when you just happen to draw them on your turn. So I think some people are going to like that mechanic. I think some people may not. But if you're one that is kind of skeptical to that mechanic, what I would say is definitely give it its chance. Give it a shot to go through and play, because I think you're going to end up liking it, and it really does add a good layer of strategy on the fly to the game, as well as very good balance between the elements and the various players. I will also mention that each one of these elements are different. They do have a little bit of a different card art on them. They're not all exactly the same, and they also have different abilities as well as things that these cards do and how they're laid out. So that will add to replayability as well. You may play fire and the next game say, well, you know what, I'm going to take earth and I'm going to play that element, and then I might play water and then wind. Each one of these elements are going to give you a different feel when you play the game. So there is quite a bit of a replayability in this game, even though there isn't a lot of components that are here. You got the various elements, and you have the customization of the decks here that you can do. There is one more thing on these cards that I do want to point out. Outside of our various symbols that we have here, there are kind of a square is sort of a cut out of it, a triangle, and all of those do have numbers in them. And again, that's just to, highest number kind of takes the cake depending on which symbol it is as well, and those are laid out in the book when you actually play the game. But I do want to show this last thing here, which is called a binary star card. And that's this little gold symbol that you see kind of right here. Now, if you were ever to lay these cards on the game, and let's say the water player here had laid these cards like this and was able to get those 2 binary star cards connected. And what that's going to do is going to make that little gold symbol like that for you. Now, at the end of the game, that's going to actually double up. It's going to multiply the victory points that you would get for these cards. Now, if any point in time it was set up like this, where you would have a different element connected there, it actually would take away from those players' victory points. So that's another component of this game. It's one more kind of thing outside of being able to get the right symbols with numbers matched up and laid down on the board. You also kind of have these little binary star deals that are involved in trying to get those symbols across the board. And it's not always as easy as one player really trying to get, that set up there where they both, for the same element, get that. And a lot of times what you find is these cards get put on the board in various positions, and then you play ability cards where it's like, oh, you can now rotate a card, or you can move a card, or you can do various things. And that's how you're going to end up probably getting, you know, those combinations. And that's a fun little strategy to kind of deploy over the course of gameplay to see that you can kind of get those things set up, because when you do, that's like massive points, and that's really going to give you an edge there at the end of the game when all of this is scored out. So that's Space Editor. Again, it's a fun little game. It's a simple game, small form factor. You can travel with this easily, and it is a great group game, and it's a good two-player head-to-head game, especially when you get into customizing your decks and going head-to-head with various strategies that may be somewhat different between both players. So I do recommend Space Editor. It's a fun game. So look for it on Kickstarter here, and hopefully this comes to retail. I'm going to love to see this in a retail package because it really is a great game. So hit that like, click the subscribe below to join the team, ring the bell. This has been the McGuire Review, and we'll see you next time. Space Exploration!